Yeah, it was July 18th, 1969. 2 days earlier, we had launched off the Apollo 11. The crew was on board on their way to the moon. There had been several Apollo shots before that, but this one was going to set foot on the moon. This is Neil Armstrong and all that stuff. So it was right during that era. It was July 18th, 2 days later. It was at the Hollywood Burbank Airport. Now, that's not far from Los Angeles, but it's north. It's Hollywood. It's right in the movie industry. It's right by NBC Studios where they do this Tonight Show, you know. Anyway, I got in my car early that morning, and the weather was really nice. We didn't have hardly any clouds, a little bit of smog is typical. And I was on the freeway at about 4:30 a.m., which is pretty typical. I tried to get up to the airport at around 5:30 or 6, which I did. And was there early, a beautiful day. I got out of my MGB and hopped over to the airplane. And to make a long story short, we were flying an airplane that's a twin engine. It seats 10 passengers. It has 10 seats inside of it. It's called a Piper Navajo Chieftain. Anywho, I got to the airport. I was the first one there. I wanted to do whatever I was instructed to do. My flight instructor, who became my friend, allowed me to go with him on his paid route. And I got paid nothing for this, but I was able to get flying experience, which was more than enough compensation. So what happened was I ended up doing all the work that he didn't like to do, including getting there early, making sure it was fueled, checking the oil and pre-flight. And I even would start up the engines and do all of that, load the airplane, secure the cargo, all before he'd even show up, usually. And so that's what happened that day. I got there early, did all the things I was told to do. And then finally Chuck showed up and we, shook hands like we normally do. And he said, "Have you done the pre-flight?" And I said, "Yes, sir. Pre-flight is done." Now I'm 19 years old. He's 27. And he has all of the degrees and the certificates that I'm working for. He's an engineer with a BA degree from a great college. And he has an ATP certificate, CFII, and so on. So he said, "Well, have you done the engine run-up?" Now, what that means is that you get in the airplane, you start the engines while you're in the parking place. You start the engines and you go through and you just check some of the basic systems, the electrical, the fuel, the hydraulics, and you make sure the engines are all warmed up and running correctly. It's called an engine run-up. And yes, I had done that. But for some reason, this day, I said to him, "Not really, no, I didn't. You're going to have to do the run-up by yourself." For some reason, and maybe it was because there was a third pilot coming that day. Maybe it's that reason I said that, but I said, "You're going to have to do an engine run-up yourself." He said, "Oh, okay, fine." Well, that just would mean that we'd be double safe that day, I thought. But anyway, he then introduced me to another guy, and I was out to shake his hand. He was a police officer who knew how to fly and had a license and had actually flown this airplane on this route by himself. So he was relatively experienced. He was in his late 30s, so he was quite a bit older than me, obviously. And Chuck said, because he's a relative of the chief pilot, that he's going to fly that day, and I'm going to be co-pilot, and Chuck's going to sit in the temporary third seat. So that was the first time that's ever happened. And so with good weather, no wind, no clouds, no hurry, just we had a schedule to keep, but we were on schedule. We got into the airplane, secured the door, and started the engines. I'm in the right seat, Gene's in the left seat, and Chuck is, again, sitting on the temporary third seat, which is basically between the two pilots and behind, okay? His knees are about where our hips are, okay? So he's watching our every move, and we start up, we go through an engine run-up, we do everything that we're supposed to do, we get clearance from the tower to take off, and Just before we're cleared for takeoff, strangely, Chuck taps me on the shoulder and says, like that, he said, let's switch seats. I will never forget that moment, of course, because it changes everything. Well, the weather was perfect. There was no wind, no clouds, nothing to worry about. The airplane was in great shape. We didn't have extra cargo. We didn't have extra anything. It was normal. I didn't sense anything was going to be different, except the fact that I'd never flown with anybody except Chuck. That's all. And I didn't know this guy. But if Chuck said he can fly, and apparently he'd flown this very airplane by himself with cargo before, I was told. But I had never met him, and Chuck said it's no problem, and he was a relative of the chief pilot, you see. And so I wasn't really apprehensive until after we started the engines and started taxiing. We're now moving, not taking off, but we were taxiing toward the runway. And I noticed then that something was strange. I felt like the airplane was going back and forth, left and right, way more than normal. We took pride in trying to be smooth. That's one of the pilot techniques. You try to pretend that you have an imaginary glass of water on the top of the instrument panel in the cockpit. It's imaginary, it's not real, and it's half full of water. And you try to make sure that that never spills. From takeoff to landing, you are so smooth that the water never spills. Then I noticed this is not a smooth taxi. In fact, this is weird. What's this all about? But I wasn't thinking about being in a crash. I just noticed that that's weird. So we stopped the aircraft in an appropriate place, set the parking brake, got a permission from the tower to do that, and Chuck and I, without getting outside of the airplane's big enough, he moved back, I got out, he got in the right seat, and then I went and sat in the temporary third seat. Well, I'd never sat in that seat before. I'd never been a third passenger in that airplane before, so that was a little bit different. But if you want to know what I was thinking, okay, I can see everything that these two pilots are doing. I'm going to learn everything there is to learn. And mainly my focus was on Chuck. What he said, how he said it, what he did, what he didn't do, because he was a guy I wanted to be like.